After my husband's funeral, my children came to me with the words, "Mom, have you already chosen a nursing home? There is a good one in our area. 2 of your friends live there, Karen and Jessica. The 3 of you will be interested." I was shocked by the intonation with which my daughter told me about this. My son stood nearby and laughed. And then he said, "Mom, Dad is gone. We are his only heirs. You don't understand anything about business. Everything will go to us anyway." I am Susan, a woman who wanted to get to higher educations, but became a mother. I was the best in school. I went to university myself, but I only worked for a few years. I wanted to go into business, but I preferred children and family. The same children that they want to put me in a nursing home for now. But I live in a 12-room mansion, have 2 maids and a gardener. I don't want to die in a nursing home. I'm not ready to die yet. They expected me to fold like yesterday's lawn chair. Instead, I smoothed the black crepe at my sleeve and smiled in that way Southern women do when what we really want to do is throw a pie. I am Susan, yes, Susan. Not Mom, like a utility you plug in when you need something. And my husband Robert wasn't just a millionaire. He was a builder, a grower, a stubborn old romantic who believed a ripe tomato could end a war if you served it with salt and an honest handshake. He also believed in me more than I had ever believed in myself. That would be relevant sooner than my darlings realized. But first came the indignity. I stood in the doorway of my dressing room, cedar-paneled, shelves measured to my handspan, while my daughter, Crystal, pinched silk blouses like they were thrift store finds and fed them into a suitcase. "You won't need evening gowns at Maple Grove," she chirped. Maple Grove, of course, being the high-end pen for inconvenient mothers. "They have bingo nights, Mom. You love games. Bingo is fine," I said, "but I'm partial to chess." She didn't look up. It's hard to meet your mother's eyes when you've downgraded her to luggage. I could hear my son Brad, downstairs, giving orders to the house staff as if he'd joined us from a refrigerator commercial. "Everything with Dad's monogram goes to storage," he called. "Keep the cufflinks, though. Those are investments." "Investments," he said, as if he'd discovered an island and named it after himself. Despair is a quiet animal. It doesn't roar. It hangs on your shoulders like a wet shawl. I felt it while Crystal zipped the suitcase over my favorite teal dress, and while I remembered every time I had made her soup, every permission slip I'd signed, every midnight ride to a broken-hearted teenage girl's rescue. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted iron. Then the doorbell rang. The lawyer arrived exactly on time. Robert valued punctuality the way kings value gold, and the house seemed to shrink to the size of his briefcase. No one knew the contents of that thing. Robert had kept his will sealed and locked, like his poker face. He trusted almost everyone, but he trusted paper more. We gathered in the library. Mahogany, leather, the smell of tobacco from the pipe he only smoked on holidays. The staff lined up by the windows, their nervous eyes flicking between my children and me. My grandson Sam, a long-legged 20-year-old with my cheekbones and his own clear conscience, slipped into the wingback beside me and took my hand under the table. I squeezed back. "There's your real wealth." The lawyer cleared his throat, unfolded the document, and began. It took 3 sentences for silence to go from polite to stunned. I had been the wife of a millionaire. By the time he finished, I was by every ranking that counts the richest widow in our state. Crystal's mouth made a pretty O, as if she'd swallowed a pearl. Brad sat back like his chair had betrayed him. The servant stood straighter. Marta, who has ironed my shirts for 20 years, crossed herself. Robert left the children exactly what he believed they could manage without burning it down. A horse stable, yes, darling, actual horses, not just a word equestrian on our sum, and a tomato factory with its beloved fields. To his foreman, Luis, he left the river cottage and a 10% share of the seasonal harvest. To Marta, the townhouse on Cedar and a lifetime stipend. To our driver, Noel, the garage, every tool, and the old Mustang he polished like a cathedral. To me, 25 million in liquid accounts, full voting control of Mitchell and May supermarkets, and the agricultural holding, tomato plantations, apple orchards, strawberry fields, every parcel Robert had ever coaxed from stubborn dirt. The paper didn't just change hands, it reset gravity. Absolutely not. Brad said finally, color flooding back into his cheeks in patches. "We'll contest. You'll do whatever you think is right, I answered, standing. Meanwhile, I'll take my things out of Crystal's suitcase. I said it sweetly, because frosting cuts better than knives. Upstairs, I reopened drawers and refolded my life. Silk slid home. The teal dress reclaimed its hook. On my bedside table lay a note I hadn't noticed, Robert's handwriting. Firm, impatient, as if the pen were a tractor and the paper land. Sue, honey, it's not fashionable to write by hand these days, but I don't give a damn about fashion. If you're reading this, then I'm no longer alive. I left everything to you because I know you'll do it. You've been doing it even when everyone else has given up. Our business is not easy these days. The competition is fierce, but there's a shortage of women's hands. Show them, Sue, what you're capable of. All you need is in my phone. The password is your date of birth. I read it twice, then pressed the paper to my lips like a prayer. All you need is in my phone, he'd written, as if he were tucking a sword into my palm. I had spent a lifetime setting tables. It seemed I was now expected to carve. On Saturday, I took that sword to a salon. Because if I was going to walk into a boardroom they'd hoped to bar me from, I was going to do it with gleaming hair and the kind of lipstick that says, "Ask your own questions. I already have answers." I settled into the chair, foil whispering, the smell of peroxide and coffee, and closed my eyes. That's when I heard it, my daughter's voice in the next room, bright as glass. "That old woman doesn't know anything," Crystal was saying. "She'll kill Dad's business by the end of the year. And when she's completely bankrupt, she'll crawl to us on her knees and beg us to buy his company for a few thousand." The stylist froze, brushed mid-air. I kept my eyes shut, because crying with foil on your head is ridiculous. I cried anyway. Hot, fast tears I hid beneath the cape. You can build a life around being useful to people, and still hear them plan your funeral while you're very much alive. Why don't your own children love you? That question is a thief. It steals sleep, appetite, the will to open your curtains. I let it pass through me. Then I chased it out. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I was a present one. I had been demanding, yes. I insisted my son go to the best law school he could get into, and I made sure the tuition checks cashed. I pushed my daughter toward a master's in business when she wanted to float on charm. When she got pregnant at 18, I took her face in my hands and told her we'd raise that baby with our heads high. If God gave her a child, then he will give her a child. That child is Sam. He loves me for my cornbread and my counsel, and bless him, neither one has a price tag. When I left the salon, my hair was the color of polished chestnuts and my spine was steel. I drove straight to the distribution office, parked in Robert's spot not because I needed to, but because symbols matter, and used the code he'd tucked into that letter, my date of birth. The phone unlocked. Spreadsheets like cornrows, contracts, satellite maps of our fields, a folder labeled "If Sue Says So" inside the folder. 3 memos drafted to me, dated over the past year, each bullet sharper than a thorn. Raise wages across farms by 18%. No one has had a raise in 12 years. Luis says we're bleeding good hands to the dairy co-op. The math works if we cut waste in packaging and renegotiate trucking. New strawberry seedlings from the Oregon breeder variety with higher bricks. Berries big enough to stun a grocer at 20 paces. Contracts pending. Buyout options on 2 neighboring tomato parcels. Owners are aging. Loans heavy. Offer cash with dignity. Keep their names on the land signs if they want. Pride is part of price. Robert had done the hard thinking and left me the courage. I could almost hear him. "Show them, Sue." I called Luis. "Meet me at field office A in 1 hour." I said. "You okay, Ciora?" He asked, gentler than my children had been all week. "I'm about to be," I told him. In the hour before that meeting, I walked the greenhouse with Noelle, who knows the old heaters by sound. We passed rows of tomato starts, 1,000 green promises, and then the strawberries' tiny crowns waiting to become dessert. I pressed my fingers into the soil. The dirt knew me. Land doesn't care if you have degrees on your wall. It cares that you show up at dawn and mean it. Back in the office, I studied the numbers. The supermarket chain Mitchell and May was cash lean but reputation rich. We owned the Saturday crowds in 6 counties. We had 2 distribution bottlenecks, 1 lazy contract with a packaging supplier who'd been overcharging us for a decade out of habit, and a broken bonus structure that rewarded speed over quality. I could fix all three, not overnight. But soon, Luis arrived, cap in hand. "You called, Jeffa. Don't call me boss," I said. "Call me Susan." He smiled like he'd been waiting years to do that. "I want to raise wages," I told him. 18% across the farms. It's overdue. We'll fund it by firing our packaging vendor, yes. Those glossy boxes, and sending work to a local shop that quotes fair. We'll renegotiate trucking, and we'll stop paying for shrink we didn't cause. I want retention bonuses tied to harvest quality, not just speed. And I want you to call the men who own the east and south parcels. Tell them I'm coming by with coffee and a fair offer. They keep their names on the signs. Luis nodded slowly. "Robert said you were the tough one." "Robert had a romantic streak," I said, but he wasn't wrong. By sunset, the plan was inked. I drove home through rows of trees the color of old pennies and pulled into the circular drive just as Crystal's car pulled out. She didn't meet my eyes. No one who has stolen your blouses looks you in the face. Inside, my room was intact, my shelves righted. On the hall table lay a legal envelope addressed to me in a hand I recognized, my son's. "We will challenge the will," the letter said. "You should agree to a mediation to avoid embarrassment." I smiled, because mercy looks different when you hold the deed. I wrote back on a yellow sticky note, and I stuck it to the envelope. "Do whatever you want." Then I poured myself a glass of red, texted Sam dinner tomorrow, your favorite pasta, and scrolled Robert's phone again. In his drafts, tucked beneath the memos and land maps, was a recipe titled Golden 40, yellow tomatoes, white pepper, a whisper of saffron, which Robert would have called fancy dust, a note in the margin. "For our 40th, name it after Sam. He's the future." I could see it. A sauce the color of sunshine in a stormy industry, jars marching off shelves, a label with my grandson's name that would shame my children without me saying one unkind word. The house settled around me, old bones remembering how to hold hope. I slept for the first time since the funeral. In the morning, Marta brought coffee and the mail. At the bottom of the stack was a plain white envelope. No return address, my name typed neatly. Inside was a single photograph. A night shot of our east tomato field, headlights sweeping across rows, a shape like a tank roaring through plants, stems chewed raw in its wake. On the back, 2 words in block letters, "Check fence." I stood very still, coffee cooling in my hand. My children wanted mediation. Someone else wanted sabotage. The first was noise. The second was war. And I do not lose wars. The photograph sat on my palm like a cold coin. "Check fence," it said, and I did. Before the sun lifted its eyelid, I was in jeans and boots, hair in a bandana, Robert's old field jacket shrugging my shoulders into its memory. I texted Luis and Noel. Then I sent one to Sam. "Be my shadow today." He replied with a thumbs up and a lightning bolt, which is grandson for "Yes, ma'am." We drove to the east field in a 3-car line, dust making ghosts in the headlights. Dew turned the tomato plants silver, and then like a gash in a wedding dress the damage appeared. 100 yards of snapped vines and churned soil, a brutal path as straight as spite. Fence wires snipped clean, rolled back into little wreaths like someone had time to be tidy about their sin. Diesel tracks, boot prints where a man had stood to admire his ruin. Luis crouched, pinched dirt, sniffed. "Brush hog," he said. "Heavy one. New blades." Noel kicked at a mangled steak and swore so softly it sounded like prayer. Sam lifted his phone and started photographing everything, as deliberate as a detective. I didn't cry. I'm not made of paper. I took pictures. I took notes. I called the sheriff. Not because I wanted sirens, but because men who vandalize at night tend to be brave only in darkness. I wanted daylight on their faces, and a report number to tattoo on any rumor that I'd staged this for insurance. I wouldn't file a claim. The premium hike would cost more than the plants. Robert taught me to do math before feelings. The deputy arrived, a courteous man with a sunburn and a notebook. He listened to Luis, wrote down the details, promised patrol after midnight. "Any enemies we ought to know?" he asked, aiming the question at all of us but landing it on me. "Anyone who thinks an old woman shouldn't run a farm," I said, smiling. "That pool's crowded, deputy. You'll need a bigger notebook." He grinned despite himself and left us with tire casts and a call if you remember card. When his dust settled, I set my jaw to level. Work. We moved undamaged plants inward, were staked leaning rows, and marked the dead so we wouldn't waste a prayer on them. Before noon, I'd ordered temporary light towers, sensors, and a dozen motion cameras hunters swear by. I called a friend on the school board and had the FA kids come earn community credit installing them. Teenagers install tech like they're born knowing what a firmware update is. I paid them cash and pizza and got a mini militia of farm-savvy geeks who now considered my Eastfield their battleground. Then I called the number in Robert's memo labeled Oregon Rita. She answered with the kind of voice that has pruners in its pocket. "This is Rita. I'm Susan Mitchell," I said. "My husband Robert bragged about you finally," she said, and I heard a smile catch fire. "You got the keys, honey?" "Keys, steering wheel, and a full tank," I said. "I want those seedlings. The ones that make grocers blush. Bricks monsters," she said. "Every big player wants them." "What do the little players offer?" "I have cash. I have integrity. I have a grandson with a good name I can put on a scholarship for a kid you choose out of your growers' families. That last one is non-transferable and comes with pie when you visit." "Pie is decisive," Rita said. "I've got a corporate buyer sniffing Tricross Foods. They're waving contracts like gospel. Tricross will shave your growers into seasons and call it fashion," I said. "I won't. I'll document every trial, share data, and not trademark a variety I didn't invent. My pitch is boring and honest." She was quiet a beat. "Boring, honest beats shiny, cruel," she said. "I can give you first pick if you can get here in 72 hours with a down payment, and I'll need guarantees you'll trial responsibly." "I'll be there in 48, I said. "And I'll bring a pie that humiliates other pies." When I hung up, Sam raised a brow. "We're going to Oregon?" "We are not tourists," I told him. "We're pilgrims. Pack a jacket." Before I flew anywhere, I had to plant flags at home. We held the wage meeting that afternoon in the equipment bay, high ceiling, fans making lazy halos, the smell of diesel and honest sweat. The crew gathered on milk crates and upside-down buckets. Faces I'd fed at barbecues. Faces I'd only nodded at from car windows because I was busy or scared of doing it wrong. My pulse stuttered. Then I remembered Crystal telling the stylist I'd crawl. I straightened and took the portable mic from Luis like it was a baton. "I can't harvest respect from fields if I don't plant it," I began. "So I'm here to tell you, today we plant. Your wages are going up 18% across the farm's effective next pay period." Eyebrows jumped like fish. Murmurs rolled. "We're not doing it by magic," I went on. "We're cutting waste. We're firing a packaging vendor who's been charging us like they're making the boxes out of moonlight. We're renegotiating trucking and partnering with the dairy co-op to fill empty backhauls. And we're adding quality bonuses. Fast is fine. Perfect is profitable. We'll measure bricks on strawberries, keep stems on tomatoes to reduce bruising, and pay more when you pick like artists." I held up a small silver gadget. "This is a refractometer. It tells you the sugar level. I'll train every crew lead how to use it. If you already know, come teach me, and I'll pay you more for that too." There was a heartbeat of quiet, like the air wanted to see if I meant it. Then someone Marta's nephew started clapping, and the sound spread like rain on a hot roof. Men who never smiled at me smiled with all their teeth. Women who'd kept their eyes down looked up. Luis swiped at his cheek as if dust had attacked him. My hands were shaking. I set the mic down before anyone noticed. That is the moment I chose to memorialize, not the will reading, not the lawyer's recital, but that bay, those faces, the knowledge that leadership lives or dies in fluorescent light with mosquitoes and math. From there, it was a day for knives and signatures. First stop, packaging. I drove to the office of our long-term supplier, a glossy showroom full of empty promises and embossed samples. The rep, a man whose cuff links were better paid than his conscience, tried to explain why cardboard cost more now because of supply chain spiritual headwinds. "Spiritual?" I asked. "Sweet as pie but sharp as a peeler. Is your cardboard being blessed by monks, or just loaded on trucks like everyone else's?" I slid a folder across his desk, 5 years of invoices with a staircase of price hikes and a little footnote he didn't think I'd catch. An auto-renewal with market adjustment that had become a slot machine. We're done, I said, standing. We'll pay what we owe and not a penny on your invented fees. A local shop will have our business by Monday. He sputtered about contracts. I smiled about lawyers. Brad got a degree for a reason. Irony is a spice, and I can sprinkle it. I drove to Soto Paper and Print, a warehouse that smelled like ink and gumption. Miss Soto ran the floor with a pencil behind her ear and a calculus brain. We shook on a number that honored her margin and respected mine. She promised a recyclable board with a hand I liked, sturdy, no nonsense. I'll put your logo on the inside flap, she said, so your pickers see you thanking them every time they fold a box. I didn't cry. I wanted to. Next, trucking. I met the dairy co-op manager in a diner that still believes in meringue. We built a backhaul plan on napkins. Milk goes east at dawn. Trucks come back west with our produce. Shared fuel costs, fewer empty miles. Everyone's mother proud. By dusk, I was back at the farm office making lists like a general. In came Marta with leftovers and foil swans. In came Noelle with a camera feed ping. A grainy clip from last night. A silhouette at the fence line. The shine of a rental truck's logo as it turned a half moon of a name before the angle lost it. I froze the frame and leaned in. You learn a lot from a sliver. The half you can see and the half you can guess. Can we enhance it? Sam asked, which is TV for make pixels become poetry. We can squint harder, I said, and we can call the 3 rental places within 10 miles and ask whether any brush hogs went out after PM last night. Luis was already dialing. 2 said no, 1 said yes, to a guy in a hurry. What name? I asked. The clerk rustled paper. Paid cash. Left a phone number. This number. He read it out. I wrote it down. It was familiar without being known. Numbers sometimes hum when they belong to trouble. Don't call it, I told Sam, who was already illuminating the keypad. Let the sheriff do that. We document. We don't duel. We ended the night in the test kitchen, which had been a room for late invoices and now was a battlefield for sugar and pectin. I'd called a food scientist Robert had consulted once. Priya, tiny and brilliant, with the calm eyes of someone who can do lab math while toddlers stick raisins up their noses. Strawberry raspberry, strawberry banana, strawberry mango, I said, laying fruit on the counter like gemstones. I want them bright, not cloying. I want them to taste like July without rotting like August. She grinned. We'll play with acid and texture. Lemon for lift, citric for pectin set. Mango's tricky. It's a diva. Banana's a mush risk. We'll purry and add late. Marta weighed sugar like a jeweler. Sam washed jars. I tasted, adjusted, surprised myself by knowing what to fix and when. We labeled sample jars with masking tape and bad handwriting. The room smelled like a childhood we deserved. Then we pulled the yellow tomatoes out, the ones for the anniversary sauce. Priya read Robert's notes, nodded. White pepper's smart. Saffron's dangerous if you're cheap with it. I'm never cheap with celebration, I said. And this one's going to be named for Sam, he blushed, then stood taller. Grandmothers, if you want a boy to be a man, give him something worthy to carry. By the time we turned the burners off, the east sky was ink. I was washing my hands when headlights skated across the window to slow for passing, too deliberate for neighborly. Noelle checked the monitors. The rental logo truck's sibling idled at the lane and then eased away when our light snapped on. They're shopping for nerves, I said. Let's not sell them any. We locked up. We slept for 3 hours. At 3:16 a.m., the motion sensors wailed. The phone by my bed shrieked. I was up and lacing boots before the second ring. Noelle's voice was taut. Southfield, Miss Susan. Irrigation line just lost pressure. I was in the truck in under a minute. Sam throwing on a hoodie and jumping in beside me. The night tasted like copper. We bumped down the lane, light towers waking, the cameras catching a flash of legs, a dark jacket, a man vaulting the ditch that now gushed where a knife had kissed plastic. We didn't chase. I'm not 20 and I don't pretend. We filmed. We counted the seconds of lost water. We pinched the line and taped it like field medics until Noelle arrived with proper couplers and a face set to war. Luis rolled in, hair wild, 2 more trucks behind him. Men ready to fix, to guard, to be the thing they needed themselves. By sunrise, the line was mended, plants drink sighing. I brewed coffee that tasted like survival and stood to speak when Noelle's radio crackled, car coming up the drive. It wasn't a car. It was a process server in a tie he hated, carrying a manila envelope like a coward's bouquet. "Miss Susan Mitchell?" he asked, looking at my boots as if they were a legal defense. "I'm the only woman here wearing lipstick," I said. "What's the bouquet?" He handed it over with apologetic eyebrows. "Temporary restraining order," he mumbled. "Petition to restrict certain management decisions pending a competency hearing." I didn't have to open it to know the authors. My 2 children, whose degrees I'd paid for and whose faces I loved even when I wanted to put them in timeout. Sam saw my jaw and touched my elbow. Quiet as a vow. I slid the envelope with a thumbnail and read. The list of prohibited acts was a catalog of everything I'd planned to do in the next 2 weeks. No wage changes, no capital expenditures over $10,000, no new contracts, no acquisitions, no product launches that materially alter company direction. A hearing date like an insult. Their signatures. A lawyer I didn't know but recognized by type. The kind who likes to win even if his client loses their soul. Luis looked at me as if waiting for lightning. The crew watched from behind their mugs. In my pocket, my husband's note warmed like a coal. "Show them, Sue," he had written. "Not shout. Not weep. Show." "All right," I said, letting the paper rest on the tailgate like a shed skin. "Then we won't spend more than $9,999 at a time. We'll write smarter contracts with contingencies. We'll post wage increases as bonuses tied to quality for the next 2 pay periods. That's not wages, that's performance reward." I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was a map. "And acquisitions can wait 48 hours. In 48 hours, I'll be in Oregon, shaking hands over seedlings that aren't technically ours yet, and buying a pie tin." The men grinned. Sam laughed, soft and fierce. Noel saluted with his coffee. I folded the order and tucked it into my jacket. "A mother cannot be at enmity with her children," I said, mostly to myself, partly to the field. "But she can teach them to read the fine print." I turned toward the office to call my pilot friend for a seat to Oregon when the sheriff's number flashed on my phone. I answered on the second ring. "Morning, deputy. Got something for you," he said. "We traced that phone number on the rental form. Belongs to a shell that pays for a fleet. Guess who uses that shell?" He told me. It wasn't my children. It was Tricross Foods. When the deputy said Tricross Foods, I had to sit down. Not because I was shocked, though. I'd stopped giving shock that kind of satisfaction, but because it confirmed what my instincts had been whispering all along. The real vultures weren't circling above me at the funeral. They were already in the field. Tricross. The same corporation sniffing around Rita's strawberries in Oregon. The same one Robert had once called a smiling wolf in a silk tie. They had money. Yes, oceans of it, but they also had a habit of drowning anyone who tried to swim near. They'd been buying out small growers across 3 states, leaving behind polite press releases about partnerships and synergy while quietly replacing old family brands with sterile new labels that smelled like accounting departments instead of earth. And now, apparently, they were sending tractors into my tomatoes at night. I thanked the deputy, hung up, and stared at the rising sun bleeding through the office blinds. Then I poured myself another coffee black, no mercy, and whispered to the empty room, "All right, boys, let's dance." I called Rita in Oregon first. Tricross sent their tanks through my field, I said, skipping hello. There was a pause, the sound of her jaw tightening through the phone. "They'll deny it," she said. "They always do. They hire third-party contractors who just happen to have the same post office box. They're trying to scare me off before I get there." "Then don't let them," she said. "The deal's still on. 48 hours. 48 hours, I repeated. "And Rita, I'm bringing an extra pie." "Make it 2, she said. "One for celebration, one for smashing." That night, I packed my suitcase myself, no crystal in sight. Thank heaven, and left it open on the bed while I drafted a press release. Yes, a press release. Robert used to say, if someone's writing your story for you, grab the pen before they finish the first paragraph. The headline read, "Widow of late agricultural icon to lead new expansion, farmers deserve better." The subhead, "Susan Mitchell announces major wage increases, sustainability plans, a new product line in honor of family legacy. I sent it to every local paper, radio station, and one friend who still worked at the regional business journal. I knew the children would choke on their morning coffee when they saw it, but I didn't care. The narrative was mine now, not theirs. Not Tricross's. Mine. Then I opened my closet, took out Robert's old leather duffel, and tucked the things that mattered inside. A framed photo of us from 1988 at the county fair, the small gold pen he'd used to sign his first land deed, my glasses, the will, and the handwritten note he'd left me. That note had already become my scripture. Before dawn, I kissed Marta's cheek goodbye, left Sam a note on the fridge: feed the fish, guard the fence, and don't let your mother read my emails, and climbed into the plane beside my pilot friend Hank. "Where to, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked, pretending he didn't already know. "Oregon," I said, "and make it quick. I've got seedlings to save." The flight was smooth until it wasn't. Halfway over the Rockies, we hit turbulence so wild my coffee decorated the window. Hank steadied the plane, but my heart had other plans. I looked out over the jagged peaks below and thought, this is what reinvention feels like: loud, unstable, but worth it. When we landed, Rita was waiting at the small airstrip, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and an expression that said she'd been expecting a ghost. "You're earlier than I thought," she said, squinting at me in the sunlight. "I'm older than I look," I said. "Let's see those strawberries." She grinned. "You've got spirit." "Robert always said you did." Robert said that. Every time we talked business, she said, he'd say, my Sue could run circles around me if she wanted to. Guess he was right. I didn't answer that. I just followed her into the greenhouse. The moment we stepped inside, I understood why Robert had called her the woman who breeds miracles. The air smelled of sugar and chlorophyll. Rows upon rows of plants stretched toward the light, vines heavy with fruit so big and glossy they looked sculpted. Rita plucked one berry, sliced it cleanly, and handed half to me. "Try it." It was sweet. Yes, but not just sweet. There was depth, like honey with a degree in chemistry. "They hold at 11.2 bricks on average," she said, proud but cautious. "No genetic tricks, no hormone boosters, just patience and crossbreeding. They're perfect," I whispered. "Tricross thinks so too," she said darkly. "They offered double what you did. Then why are you still talking to me?" She shrugged. "Because you sound like a woman who still knows how to fight fair. And because I'd rather my berries end up in a jar with your husband's name on them than in a corporate warehouse labeled Unit 17C. I signed the deal that afternoon. 50,000 new seedlings, split between 2 deliveries. A handshake, a contract, and a promise. If Tricross so much as breathed near her property again, I'd send my lawyers before sunset. On the flight home, I drafted another note, this one to my own staff. "We're not competing with Tricross. We're proving they're unnecessary. Start prepping the East greenhouse for incoming seedlings. Tell the press the widow Mitchell is planting again and she's not alone." When I arrived back home, the mansion felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe I was. Sam greeted me at the door like a puppy in sneakers. "Grandma, the new camera's caught someone again, but you're gonna laugh." "I doubt it," I said, hanging up my coat. He led me to the monitor. There, under the security floodlight, was Crystal, my daughter, creeping across the front lawn in oversized sunglasses and a hoodie, dragging something behind her. What on earth? The feed zoomed. She was stealing potted roses. "My God," I muttered. "I raised a cat burglar with a degree in marketing. Mom said they were hers," Sam said carefully. "She also once said she was allergic to honesty," I replied. "Seems consistent." Still, I didn't call the police. A mother's dignity is measured by the number of things she refuses to dignify. The next morning, the press release hit the local papers. "Widow takes the reins of Mitchell in May." My phone rang all day. Journalists, old friends, suppliers who'd been too polite to call since Robert died. One even said, "I didn't know you were running the business now." "I didn't either," I said, until someone tried to stop me. By noon, I'd been invited to the annual State Agricultural Conference, the first woman to headline the keynote in 20 years. I accepted immediately. Then I phoned the children. Crystal didn't answer. Brad did. "What are you doing, Mom?" he barked. "You can't just." "I can, dear," I said. I'm a majority shareholder. I checked. Also, your injunction doesn't cover press statements or conference speeches. Next time, have your lawyer use smaller font. He hung up. I smiled. By the end of that week, my greenhouse smelled like the future. The Oregon seedlings arrived under escort, escorted by Luis and 3 of the Fa kids. The plants looked like they were glowing, their leaves a shade of green I hadn't seen since Robert's early seasons. We held a small ceremony, nothing formal, just coffee and thermoses and a few prayers murmured in Spanish and English. Sam took pictures for the company newsletter. I watched as they planted the first row, each root wrapped carefully, each name tag handwritten. Grandma, Sam said, wiping his hands, you're trending on TikTok. I beg your pardon. Someone filmed your wage speech, he said. It's all over the internet. People are calling you the tomato queen. I laughed so hard I nearly fell into the compost bin. Good heavens. I've been called worse. That night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of red wine, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace laced with purpose. The stars looked like confetti thrown by heaven itself, but peace never lasts long in a story like mine. At 10:43 p.m., my phone pinged a text from an unknown number. Nice strawberries. Shame if they went missing too. No signature. Just a photo attached, a nighttime shot of one of the new greenhouses, taken from close range. Too close. I looked up from the phone and saw, across the yard, a flicker of light in the darkness. Movement by the fence. I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. I reached for Robert's old shotgun unloaded, but they didn't need to know that, and stepped out onto the porch. Whoever you are, I said into the night, voice steady as a sermon. You've got 30 seconds to run before I count the rest out loud. The bushes rustled. A man's shape broke away from the fence line and disappeared into the dark. I waited until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore, then smiled. Slow and dangerous. Try cross. I whispered. You really should have picked someone else's widow. The next morning, I called the sheriff again, then the FBI Agricultural Crimes Division, then, because I've always believed in good theater, the biggest television station in the state. If they want a war, I told the reporter who answered, then they'll get one. But they should remember, I grow the food. They just sell the jars. And somewhere between that phone call and the sunrise, I decided exactly how to fight back. Not with lawsuits, with success, because there's nothing a greedy child or a corporation hates more than watching a woman they underestimated become unstoppable. And by God, I intended to become just that. I have a confession. I like to win in pretty ways. Not because I'm vain, though I do enjoy a well-turned label, but because cruelty is cheap and success sticks to people's teeth. If you want to teach greed a lesson, you don't throw stones. You build a bakery and sell bread so good it embarrasses the thieves into a digestive upset. That, more or less, became my strategy. After the greenhouses were stabilized and the sensors had become the neighborhood watch, I turned my attention to the jars. Robert had always said, people will forget names, but they'll remember what they ate, so I decided to make them remember us. First order of business, product development. Priya and I spent an entire weekend in the test kitchen, which, in my household, is the closest thing to a church. We made jam until the counters were sticky and our tongues smarted. The 3 new lines, strawberry raspberry, strawberry banana, strawberry mango, had to be distinct and true. No chemical bling, no syrupy lies. They needed to taste like hand watering at dawn, like little girls stealing fruit from rows, like sun on forearms. Priya was brilliant. She balanced acidity and sugar like a piano tuner. Sam was our chief taste tester, a role he took seriously, if only because it allowed him to steal spoons and flirt with interns who helped label jars. The golden 40 sauce, the yellow tomato concoction Robert had scribbled in the margin of an old notebook, was my pride. It wouldn't be ordinary ketchup-colored sympathy. No, this sauce would be a celebration. White pepper brightening its throat, a sliver of saffron to make the jar glow like a coin, and a whisper of toasted garlic for backbone. We decided its name quietly and with love. Sam's grin when I suggested it made my chest ache. Mitchell's Sam's Son Sauce. It sounded like a child with a name, not a product with a barcode. Branding is a funny beast. You can have the best berry in the world and your jar can whisper obscurity if the label is timid. So I called Miss Soto and asked for a label that looked like honest work, thick stock, recycled, a ribbon of sun on the neck. She drew a little sunflower that looked like it could hug a mason jar. I insisted the inside flap of each tomato box had a handwritten thank you note printed a small flourish so the pickers and packers would feel seen. I wanted the person who tied the string to feel pride that would travel with the product to any checkout aisle. That pride was expensive. We had just increased wages, and now we were investing in packaging, in a better bottling line, in refrigeration for the faster routes. Brad's injunction still hung like an overcast, limiting certain capital expenditures and acquisitions. I could have waved a theatrical hand and sulked. Instead, I learned to spend cleverly. I split projects into phases, using smaller contracts that nodded at the injunction's language but delivered meaningful progress. Brad's lawyer did not appreciate the creativity of a woman who'd learned to count 2 different ways, by the calendar and by the harvest. We needed retailers. Mitchell and May already had shelf space in all our stores, but I wanted our products everywhere: the small grocer in town, the upscale market with the polished hardwood floors, even the corner bodega that sold lottery tickets and empathy in equal measure. I packed up samples, polished my shoes, and went store to store with Marta at my elbow and Sam filming for the company's social feed, because if you aren't humiliating your children into conversation via social media these days, are you even in business? The first few meetings were education. Buyers who'd been passing Robert's handwritten notes back and forth like incense finally met me and needed evidence I could handle numbers as well as recipes. I came armed with projections, margins, and real figures from the trial batches. I told them honestly that we were increasing wages and that meant we needed to be paid for quality. If your store wants produce that looks like it was kissed by weather and handled with care, we'll give it to you, I said. If you want tomatoes like embossed secrets, go with someone else. Some buyers snorted. Some bought. One regional chain, Old Mill Markets, signed a medium-sized contract after a private tasting I hosted in their manager's empty office. They loved the Samsung sauce's brightness and the strawberry raspberry jam's bite. They ordered an initial pallet and asked for exclusives on promotions. The first real order made my niece feel like a teenager's again. Word spread like it does now, quickly and with little dignity. Sam's clip of my wage speech and the Fa Kids installing cameras went viral locally. People were touched by the story of a widow who was refusing to be moved into a nursing home because she had things to do. Comments flooded with goodwill and, importantly, orders. Social media is a town square and I used it like a town crier, but success is also a target. Tricross, which had been shadowing us like a bad rain cloud, began to play their games overtly. The first move was a smear campaign. Anonymous accounts posted photos of jam jars with tongue-in-cheek captions claiming our strawberry mango contained mystery fruit. A blogger I'd never heard of wrote an article about non-existent pesticide traces and called for testing. My email filled with queries from fearful buyers. It's amazing how quickly someone who posts a picture of a yellow spoon and the letters "No" can make a company's PR team break a sweat. I called my lawyer, and we threatened libel suits. But litigation eats time like caterpillars eat seedlings. Instead, I called Priya and demanded third-party lab tests, full panels, transparent results, published on our website. We also invited an independent food blogger, one with the taste buds of a saint and a follower base that made sponsors weep to the test kitchen for a live session. She announced our product safe, genuine, and like a county fair with good manners. The smear collapsed like a souffle. Tricross's proxies slunk back to their spreadsheets. The next move was more sinister. A morning driver reported that a pallet bound for Old Mill Markets had been delayed at a truck stop 3 hours from our distribution center. When we tracked it, the pallet was missing. Stolen, the carrier said flatly. We'll file a report. I stood there with that hollow, empty feeling like someone had taken a loaf from my table. The sheriff's office took the report but told me these thefts often had no easy resolution. I suspected Tricross. I suspected foul play. But suspicion is not proof. I refused to cry in public. Instead, I called an old friend who ran logistics for a nonprofit and asked for advice on secure routes and tamper-evident seals. We started using serialized RFID tags and GPS locks on the high-value pallets. We increased insurance and paid a private security firm to shadow certain shipments. It cost money. It made me furious and more careful. Meanwhile, the fields began to sing. Raising wages worked in ways my spreadsheets had predicted and in ways no numbers can account for. Farmers who had been tired, beaten down by years of the same routine, began to move differently. They watched for disease earlier, they called for pruning support, and they treated seedlings like piano students. The harvests improved. Tomatoes matured more evenly. Strawberries were picked with stems intact, which meant less bruising and better shelf life. The first trial shipments to Old Mill markets sold out in a weekend. The store manager called to ask for more. The Fa kids who'd installed cameras showed up at distribution to help pack, and their parents stopped asking for community service credit and started asking for jobs. Those changes trickled back into the orchards and fields like good weather. The apple yields improved, and the strawberry bricks levels we'd been measuring rose slowly but demonstrably. We documented everything, because data comforts buyers. We posted harvest photos, worker interviews, and footage of Marta teaching a picking technique she'd learned in CDs. Customers loved it. They loved the story as much as the fruit. Crystal tried to undermine morale in small, petty ways. She called the head of HR and left a message insinuating I was making reckless moves with company funds. Brad quietly campaigned a few board members, whispering about an elder widow who had lost perspective. They were like children throwing stones from behind a hedge. I did not engage. You can shout back and be small, or you can build bigger. So I built bigger. I began an acquisition plan that read like a slow waltz rather than a stampede. Discreet letters to aging landowners, offers that came with both cash and dignity. Keep your name on the sign, I told every seller. Take the money. Enjoy the pie we'll bring to the closing. Some said no, proud of a lifetime of toil. Others, those with mortgages like millstones, said yes and cried on my shoulder as they signed. The first small purchase, 300 acres south of the main farm, closed under the radar. Small enough to fly under Brad's injunction radar, but large enough to matter. It gave us a buffer, a place to rotate crops properly, and a neighbor who used to rent equipment to try cross. He now rented it to me. The board meetings became theater. Brad's camp tried motions that would starve our plans. Audits, temporary freezes, and requests for competency evaluations that smelled like a desperate man buying time. I attended every meeting with a PowerPoint that made numbers sing and with stacks of signed community letters from employees, suppliers, and Old Mill Market's manager, who'd become our biggest advocate. I spoke about dignity, not revenge, and I let the evidence do the shouting. People are moved by profit and by pride. I aimed for both. Then came the opening weekend. We launched Sam's Sun Sauce and the 3 Jams with an event at Mitchell and May's flagship store. We gave out free samples, and I gave a short speech that made the local paper call me irreverent and wise. I told a story about Robert sneaking 2 tomatoes into our honeymoon picnic because he couldn't stand to leave one behind. People laughed and clapped. The first pallets shipped that morning, and by noon, the flagship inventory display was a landscape of yellow and red and berry hope. And then the phone rang. The carrier, the first big pallet, the one bound for a cluster of small grocers in the next county, had been intercepted. Not stolen this time. Seized. An inspector had found a foreign body in one jar. A nut fragment, said the caller, and until they tested every jar from that batch, they would hold that shipment. The grocers panicked. Orders were delayed. My stomach dropped. I had suppliers, lab results, batch numbers, and Priya's meticulous notes. We fast-tracked tests. We flew a sample to an independent lab and watched the hours crawl. The community forum filled with fear. Someone on the internet had posted a blurry image of a jar with what looked like a tiny brown flake beside the lid. The comments filled with accusations before the lab had a chance to breathe. We did everything right. Chain of custody, CCTV showing the line clean, statements from every packer. But PR is a fickle animal. The rumor grew like mold in a damn carton. Tricross's friendly blogger posted a triumphant piece titled, "Small Companies' Carelessness Exposes Consumers," Their lawyer called my distributor and asked whether we'd voluntarily recall. The sheriff called and asked me for patience. Patience is a virtue people hand you when they don't want to hand over their help. I decided I wouldn't wait for the world to decide whether I was decent. I would prove it. I invited the busiest state health inspector to our facility, gave her taste tests, showed her every sieve and screen, and walked her through our batching logs. She watched a CCTV of the filling line on loop and asked questions with an impartial curiosity I admired. After 5 hours, she sat me down and sighed. Someone planted that fragment, she said finally. It wasn't packing, it was sabotage, and the way it's timed, calculated. I felt a hot laugh bubble up. Of course it was, I said. Whoever thinks a woman raises tomatoes to ruin them deserves a lifetime of Mennonite bread. She frowned at me, then smiled. Don't go to war with food metaphors unless you're prepared to feed a town afterward, she said. We'll release a statement that we've lifted the hold pending lab confirmation. But I suggest you be cautious. Whoever did this is clever. Clever. That made the danger sharper. Somebody was trying to orchestrate a recall and ruin our opening weekend. My children had motive. Tricross had resources. Whoever it was had chosen to play a tune I didn't recognize. We published the lab results when they came back negative for contaminants, clear as a bell. We documented everything in excruciating detail, chain of custody, packer notes, pick timestamps. We invited customers to come to the plant. We offered free jars to anyone who wanted to taste for themselves. The flagship sold out faster. Old Mill called to congratulate us and said their customers were asking where they could buy our products year-round. But the victory tasted a little like tin. Someone had tried to stop us with a gust of fear, and they had failed. Yet the attempt meant escalation. Sabotage is not a neighborly act. It is a message, and messages have authors. I stood in the warehouse that night amid boxes and the soft hum of refrigeration. I thought of the man who'd left his will to me and trusted me with the thing he'd grown for 50 years. I thought of the faces of the workers who'd chosen to stay. I thought of Sam, who had already started drawing logos for the kids' lunchroom as if he were designing a future. I thought of my children, who were capable of spite because they were afraid. The phone on the bench buzzed. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. But the night had taught me that cowards sometimes leave clues. The voice on the other end was clipped and heavily masked by a device that rasped like a paper mill. You've done well, it said. Too well. Then the line went dead. I sat there, breathing the hum and the cool air, and felt a thrill of pure anger. This was bigger than petty litigiousness. Someone with money and influence wanted our story to end. I poured myself a small glass of brandy and looked at the crates labeled Sam's son. On one label, in my handwriting, I'd written, "For Sam." For a second, the grief was a physical thing, not just the absence of Robert, but the presence of his faith in me. I raised my glass to the empty air. All right, then, I said softly. They want war. I'll show them peace worth defending. The next morning, a driver called me on my cell to say a truck had been stopped by a county officer on a back road. The pallet of jars he was hauling, one of the first full pallet shipments of Sam's son sauce, had been removed and was nowhere to be found. The gasp I heard on the line wasn't from the driver. It was from the bottle in my hand, ringing against the glass. Someone out there wanted us silent, empty-handed, and small. I slipped into my boots, locked the office behind me, and drove to the distribution center. The lot was full of security lights and men whose hands smelled like diesel and worry. They looked up when I arrived, because they know I turn up when things aren't casual. Which shipment is missing? I asked. The one with the black pallet tag, the dispatcher said. He handed me a printout. The serialized RFID number matched the ones we'd affixed in the morning. It pinged on the bridge, then nothing. The GPS showed movement until it didn't, like a song that stops mid-verse. My jaw set. The thefts had become a pattern. A broken fence, nighttime herbicide claims that vanished in court, a planted nut, a missing pallet. Someone was pushing our dominoes. I looked at the faces around me, men and women who'd been with us before Robert died, people who'd seen us through drought and blight. They were waiting for more than orders. They were waiting for me to tell them what came next. Gather the crew, I said. We're going to track it ourselves. No one asked why. Loyalty, I've learned, is a currency you earn by giving it. They grabbed jackets and flashlights, and we piled into trucks with the kind of silence that is not fear but focus. We would follow the trail of a stolen pallet like detectives in overalls. We would find out whether Tricross wanted to starve us or merely frighten us. And if they were responsible, if their shadow had fingers in this, then they were about to learn something new about the Mitchell family. We were small and stubborn and armed with jars of sunshine. And that, more than anything, was what made me dangerous. The road that night was a strip of suspicion under a cold moon. Dust curled behind our convoy like ghosts too curious to let go. I drove in the lead truck, Noel beside me, flashlight on his knee, radio clipped to his shirt. Behind us, Luis's pickup followed with 2 farmhands and Sam, my grandson, sitting in the back with his camera ready, determined to record whatever we found. The tracker we'd attached to the missing pallet gave off 1 weak signal before going silent near the old Miller Highway, an abandoned stretch of road that used to run straight into Tricross's distribution complex before they rerouted their deliveries. Coincidence, the sheriff would say. I don't believe in coincidences. They're just secrets that haven't been confronted yet. When we turned off the main road, the air changed. You could smell it, metal and earth. The scent of a place where too many machines have moved without purpose. The tracker beeped once, then quit again. I slowed, killed the headlights, and coasted until Noel tapped my arm. There, he whispered, half a mile ahead, the faint glow of a bonfire. Around it, silhouettes 2, maybe 3 men. A semi-trailer parked sideways, its logo hidden under a tarp, but the gleam of chrome wheels gave it away. Luis's voice crackled over the radio, Tricross tires. I'd know that pattern anywhere. I stared at the scene for a long moment, and then, very calmly, I said, Noel, get the sheriff on the phone. Tell him Susan Mitchell's about to trespass on her own stolen property. He blinked. Ma'am, call him, I repeated, and tell him to bring a photographer, not a preacher. By the time the sheriff arrived, we'd already walked down the dirt track, our flashlights slicing through the dark like resolve. The men around the fire scattered when they saw us. 1 bolted toward the trailer, another dropped a crowbar, and the third, younger than my grandson, froze like a deer. Stop right there, I called. You're standing in front of goods you didn't pay for. The sheriff's car pulled up behind us, lights flashing blue and white. He stepped out, took 1 look at the pallet wrapped in black shrink plastic, and whistled low. Well, I'll be, he said. Ma'am, I think you just solved your own case. We cut the wrap open. Inside, Sam's Sun sauce jars intact, not a single one broken. Each lid stamped with the batch number from our first production run. Someone had tried to remove the RFID tracker, but hadn't found the tiny backup chip Luis had glued inside the pallet frame. Robert always said, never trust 1 line of defense when you can have 2. The men were arrested. Under questioning later, the youngest one cracked. He'd been paid cash enough to make it worth losing a night's sleep to divert the pallet and leave it in a warehouse that coincidentally belonged to a Tricross subcontractor. It wasn't proof enough to sue, but it was plenty to expose. And if there's one thing a bully hates more than losing, it's being seen. The next morning, I woke up at 5 sharp and called a reporter from the State Herald, the same woman who'd covered my wage announcement months earlier. Her name was Grace, and she had a knack for smelling stories that rattled powerful cages. Grace, I said, how do you feel about tomatoes with a side of corruption? By noon, she was in my office, recorder in hand, eyebrows raised. I laid it all out. The sabotage, the thefts, the fake contamination scare, the field vandalism, the false rumors. I didn't accuse anyone by name, but I left enough breadcrumbs for a clever reader to find their way to Tricross's front gate. Grace's article hit the digital press that evening. Widow's War. Family farm fights back against corporate sabotage. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't flatter. She just told the truth, in sentences that burned hotter than gossip. By the next day, we had 3 TV trucks parked outside the main farm gate and a swarm of curious faces on social media. People love a David and Goliath story, especially when David wears red lipstick and a pearl bracelet while issuing cease and desist letters. Tricross, of course, denied everything. Their CEO, smooth, silver-haired, and smirking like a game show host, released a statement about misunderstandings between supply partners. They offered to assist with distribution and oversee safety compliance for free. In other words, a leash disguised as a gift. I responded publicly with one line: Mitchell and May will oversee its own destiny. Thank you kindly. That line ended up quoted on mugs, tote bags, and t-shirts within a week. Marta started selling them in the store cafe, and customers bought them faster than the jam. The scandal might have ended there if not for my children. They couldn't stand to see my name trending while theirs disappeared from every conversation except legal filings. Brad filed a new motion, this time claiming mismanagement of estate resources because of my unapproved media exposure. Crystal added a supporting affidavit, complaining that I was defaming the family name. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. I walked into court that day wearing a cream suit and Robert's old gold brooch shaped like a tomato vine. The judge, an older woman with the kind of patience only found in saints and kindergarten teachers, looked at my children, then at me. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, your children are petitioning to restrict your control over the family business pending financial review. How do you respond? I smiled. Your Honor, I'd respond by saying that my children are good students but slow learners. The courtroom snickered. Brad's ears turned pink. Crystal tried to glare me into submission, but I'd been married for 30 years to a man who could silence a tractor engine with one look. Her glare was child's play. I handed the judge a folder. Inside, audited financial statements, profit charts, letters from our distributors, and an independent valuation showing our company's revenue had increased 23% since I'd taken charge. The judge flipped through the papers, adjusted her glasses, and looked up. You're telling me you increased profits while raising wages? Yes, ma'am, I said. When you treat people like shareholders and hope they deliver dividends and loyalty. She chuckled, closed the folder, and turned to my children. I think your mother's doing just fine. Motion denied. I didn't gloat. I simply turned to Brad and Crystal, smiled sweetly, and whispered, see you at Christmas. For a few blessed weeks, life returned to something like normal. The Samsung sauce hit the supermarket shelves statewide and sold faster than we could bottle. The bright yellow label became a symbol of optimism. Food bloggers called it liquid sunlight. But success has a way of attracting new storms. One morning, Luis ran into my office looking pale. Señora Susan, he said, you need to see this. He held out a flyer that had been pinned to the gates overnight. It was printed on glossy paper, expensive stock, the kind you'd use for real estate brochures. The headline screamed, Mitchell and May under investigation for labor violations. Below it were fake quotes from anonymous workers claiming they'd been underpaid, overworked, and denied breaks. It even listed a fake hotline number for victims. I felt my stomach drop, not because I believed it, but because I knew how fast lies spread when they wear the costume of justice. Tricross again, Luis muttered. Or my darling children, I said, folding the flyer neatly. Either way, they've just chosen the wrong playground. I called the workers together that afternoon. Everyone gathered under the shade of the big oak near the barn, the one Robert had planted when Sam was born. I held up the flyer and let the breeze snatch one corner. Anyone here feel mistreated? I asked loudly. A murmur of laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, only when you make us eat your sugar-free pie, Mrs. Mitchell. Fair criticism, I said, but that's not a crime. We took a group photo, dozens of workers smiling, holding their pay slips and jars of jam. Sam uploaded it with the caption, proud to work where we're treated like family. Within hours, it had more shares than the fake flyer ever would. That night, I sat on the porch again, the quiet hum of the fields in my ears. Sam came out with 2 mugs of cocoa. Grandma, he said, sitting beside me, why don't you ever get mad? Oh, I get mad, I said. I just prefer to channel it through spreadsheets and strategy instead of shouting. He grinned. That's not how my mom does it. Your mother thinks anger is a performance, I said softly. I think it's an energy source. He leaned against me. You know, you could retire. You've already proved everyone wrong. Maybe, I said, but I'm not finished proving what's right. A week later, Grace the reporter called me again. Susan, rumor has it Tricross's CEO is hosting a gala downtown next Friday. They're announcing a new community partnership program. My guess is it's a PR stunt to clean up their image after your story. You should be there. Oh, I intend to be, I said. Press pass? She asked. Front row seat, I replied. And a surprise announcement. When I hung up, I felt the familiar buzz in my veins. It was the same feeling I'd had when Robert used to take my hand before a new planting season and say, "Let's make something grow that shouldn't." Only this time, what I planned to grow wasn't a tomato. It was a reckoning. For the next several days, I prepared my speech for that gala as carefully as I'd once prepared Thanksgiving dinner for 40. Every word was measured to sting politely. I had numbers, photos, testimonies, and a new report showing how our farm's new sustainability initiative had cut emissions and boosted productivity, something Tricross had been promising investors for years but never achieved. I wasn't just going to attend their event. I was going to steal their spotlight. When Friday arrived, I put on a scarlet dress, the kind of color that announces itself before you do. Marta insisted on doing my hair. "You look like power," she said proudly. "I look like payback," I corrected. And as I stepped out of the car in front of that glittering hotel, flashbulbs popping, reporters calling my name, I smiled, not the sweet smile of a widow anymore, but the dangerous one of a woman who's found her second youth in defiance. The night was about to get interesting. The hotel ballroom was all chandeliers and false laughter, the kind of place where people toast a community while mentally calculating the return on investment. Tricross had outdone itself. Waiters in tuxedos floated through the room carrying trays of shrimp cocktails and false humility. Their CEO, Harold Greer, tall, silver-haired, and smug enough to think God took dictation from his press releases, stood by the stage greeting donors like a preacher at a collection plate. I walked in uninvited, of course. Grace the reporter had secured me a press pass, but I didn't bother to wear it. I preferred the mystery. A 63-year-old widow in a red dress commands attention on her own merit. The murmurs started almost immediately. I caught fragments. "That's her. The tomato lady. Didn't her husband die last year?" Like a wind carrying pollen and rumor. Good, I thought. Let them whisper. Whispers grow faster than weeds, and I had a harvest to plant tonight. Harold spotted me as I approached the refreshment table. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, "smooth as overripe fruit, Mrs. Mitchell. I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, Harold," I said, selecting a canap. "Don't sound so disappointed. You invited the press, didn't you?" "I'm technically part of the coverage now." He chuckled nervously. "This is a private function. We're announcing our new partnership program tonight, a collaboration between Tricross and small family-owned farms. Maybe even yours, if you're willing to make peace." "Peace," I repeated, tasting the word like vinegar. "Peace isn't something you buy with cocktail shrimp, Harold. It's something you earn." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Be careful, Susan. You're making powerful enemies." "Then they should have picked a quieter woman to provoke," I said. I left him standing there, blinking, and made my way toward the podium. The MC, a man who clearly thought his tuxedo made him interesting, was warming up the crowd with some nonsense about innovation in agriculture. Grace caught my eye from her seat at a table near the front and gave the tiniest nod, my cue. When the MC invited Harold to the stage, the room hushed. He launched into his speech, practiced, predictable, polished within an inch of its life. He spoke of sustainability, of mutual growth, of partnering with small farmers to ensure food security. I almost applauded. It was the best fiction I'd heard since my son told me he'd borrowed my car at 17. When Harold finished, the applause was tepid but polite. He gestured grandly toward the audience. "And to demonstrate our commitment to unity," he said, "we've invited several respected voices in our industry to share their insights tonight. Please welcome." He glanced down at his cue card and froze. Because where he expected another Tricross executive's name, he found mine. Grace had worked faster than I thought. "Mrs. Susan Mitchell," he stammered. "Of Mitchell and May." The crowd murmured. Cameras swung in my direction. I walked to the stage, my heels clicking like punctuation. "Thank you, Harold," I said sweetly, taking the microphone. It's such a pleasure to be among so many admirers of agriculture, though, judging by some of your nails, not many practitioners. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Harold's smile twitched. I wasn't planning to speak. I continued, but when I heard Tricross was launching a partnership initiative, I thought I should clarify what partnership really looks like. I clicked the remote I'd tucked into my clutch, and the projector behind me lit up with a photo. One of our tomato fields' golden morning light. Workers smiling, rose straight as soldiers. This, I said, is what partnership looks like. It's people who earn their living by the sun and the soil. It's paying them what they're worth, not what you can get away with. It's letting them take pride in their work so the fruit tastes like pride too. Another click. A new image appeared, the vandalized field from months ago, broken vines and tire tracks. This, I said, is what exploitation looks like. Someone did this to intimidate a family farm into selling. Someone who thought a widow wouldn't fight back. Someone who believed money can erase conscience. The crowd shifted uneasily. Harold turned pale. Now, I'm not naming names, I said, eyes locking on him. But let's just say if the shoe fits, it probably stepped on a tomato or two. Gasps and laughter mingled. Cameras flashed. Grace was grinning ear to ear, recording every second. I came here tonight to say this, I continued. I don't believe in revenge. I believe in accountability. I don't believe in corporate charity. I believe in fair trade. And I certainly don't believe that the people who tried to bury my husband's legacy will get away with planting lies in its place. Another click, and now the screen showed a chart. Our sales numbers, up 23% since the wage increases. Then a second slide. Worker satisfaction surveys, customer reviews, retailer reorders. Proof of something money can't fake: respect. Mitchell and May isn't for sale, I said. Not to Tricross, not to anyone. Because integrity doesn't have a price tag. And if you came here tonight hoping I'd bow, you'll leave remembering that a woman who grows tomatoes can also grow a backbone. The applause that followed was thunderous. Some guests stood, some clapped hesitantly, watching Harold for cues. But it was too late. The cameras had already captured the moment. The widow in red, the CEO frozen behind her, the image of the broken field glowing like evidence in a courtroom. I handed the microphone back to the stunned MC. You can keep the shrimp, I told him, and walked off stage. Grace caught up to me in the lobby. Susan, that was magnificent. You realize this will be everywhere by morning? I hope so, I said, fixing my lipstick in a mirror. Sunlight disinfects faster than lawyers. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing non-stop. Calls from distributors, from journalists, from old friends who hadn't spoken to me since the will reading. Even the governor's office left a message requesting a meeting to discuss agricultural resilience. Tricross issued a bland statement before dawn about mutual misunderstandings. Within 48 hours, their stock dipped 3 points. I might have danced in my kitchen if Marta hadn't beaten me to it, waving a dish towel like a flag, but my celebration was short-lived. 2 days later, the sheriff came to my door again. He looked tired, hat in hand, the kind of posture that says, I'd rather be anywhere else right now. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, we found something you ought to see. He handed me a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a cell phone, scorched around the edges. Found it in one of the arrested men's trucks from the pallet theft, he said. Burned out. But our tech guys pulled some of the data. He showed me a printed text log, several messages from an unsaved number. Job tonight. Same place. Bonus if she panics. No cops. Just make it look like accident. After Friday. No more Mitchell problem. The last message's timestamp was the night before the gala. My skin prickled. Sheriff, I said slowly, are you telling me someone planned to harm me? He hesitated. We think they meant to scare you off, not that. But whoever this number belongs to, well, the trail ends at a Tricross contractor's logistics manager. The guy resigned this morning. I nodded, steadying myself against the doorway. So they failed again, I said. Yes, ma'am, he said softly, but they're getting reckless. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the wind move through the apple trees. Fear is a strange thing. It doesn't make me smaller. It makes me deliberate. If they wanted to break me, They should have done it before I remembered who I was. So instead of trembling, I wrote. I drafted letters to every retailer, every local farmer, every co-op manager within 100 miles, inviting them to a summit at our farm. Not a press conference, a gathering. I called it the Harvest Accord. The idea was simple. Small and mid-sized farms forming a cooperative network to share distribution, security, and innovation without bowing to corporate giants. Everyone would keep their independence, but we'd move product through a shared logistics pipeline safer, faster, and cheaper. Strengthened roots, not crowns. Robert would have loved it. By morning, I had 50 confirmations. By the next day, 100. Even some former Tricross suppliers wrote privately to say they were tired of being bullied. We set the date for 2 weeks later. Marta and Priya handled catering. Sam managed press coverage. Luis assembled the crew to repair the old barn, string lights, and lay hay bales for seating. I rehearsed my opening speech in the mirror, but it didn't need much polish. The words were born honest. On the eve of the event, Sam knocked on my door, holding a package. This came for you, Grandma. No return address. The box was small. Inside, a single jar of Sam's Sun Sauce My Sauce, but the label was smeared with black paint, and a note was tucked inside. Accidents happen in processing plants. Watch your step. Sam saw my expression. You think it's Tricross? I said quietly. Someone just gave me the ending to my next speech. He frowned. You're still going through with it? I smiled. Darling, I didn't survive widowhood, lawsuits, and sabotage to back out because someone mailed me a condiment threat. He laughed despite himself, though his eyes were worried. Get some rest, Grandma. Rest is for people without harvests to win, I said. And when he left, I placed a jar on the table beside Robert's photo and whispered, Looks like your girls got one more round to fight outside. The wind rattled the windows, but it didn't scare me. It sounded like applause. The morning of the Harvest Accord dawned the way all good revolutions do, quiet, golden, and pretending to be ordinary. The sky over the Mitchell estate was a pale sheet of promise, and the air smelled like fresh-cut hay and purpose. By 7, the long drive was full of trucks, wagons, and borrowed sedans. Farmers from every corner of the state, sleeves rolled, boots dusty, faces creased by sun and skepticism. Marta had strung pennant banners between the barns, and Priya's team had set up tables with coffee so strong it could raise the dead. When I stepped outside, the crowd parted like a congregation that wasn't sure if I was the preacher or the storm. Morning, I said, loud enough to carry. Hope everyone's ready to plant something new. They laughed, tension breaking. I led them toward the big red barn, Robert's barn now cleaned, lit with string bulbs, the smell of wood and memory heavy in the air. This was it. The moment. The widow they'd nearly buried in bureaucracy was about to build an empire on cooperation. Sam managed the live stream, his phone on a tripod, capturing every handshake and camera flash. Luis stood at the back, flanked by the crew, eyes like a hawk. The sheriff, God bless him, had quietly stationed 2 deputies at the gate just in case your fan club gets creative. He'd said, I climbed the small platform we'd built from old pallets, took a breath, and looked at the faces before me, wrinkled, sunburnt, alert. Friends, I began. I was raised to believe that land is both inheritance and responsibility. We're stewards, not owners. But lately, it seems the world's forgotten that. The big corporations, Tricross among them, are turning food into a weapon and farmers into footnotes. And I, for one, refuse to be a footnote in my own story. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. I saw heads nod, arms cross, hearts open. Many of you know what they did, I continued. They tried to break my fields, steal my shipments, ruin my name. They thought I'd fold. Instead, I planted, and I harvested something they can't buy: solidarity, applause, loud and real. I waited for it to ebb before holding up a folder. This is the charter for the Harvest Accord, a cooperative alliance between family farms and local producers. Shared trucking, shared cold storage, shared purchasing power. You'll keep your names, your land, your independence, but together, we'll have leverage those glass tower parasites can't ignore. A man in the front row leaned, skeptical, A tomato grower from downstate raised a hand. And what happens when Tricross comes for all of us? I smiled. Then they'll have to come through me first. That got a roar. As signatures filled the page, I felt Robert's presence, as vivid as the hum of bees outside. I imagined him leaning against a doorframe, hands in his pockets, saying, "That's my Sue planting empires instead of petunias." The sun climbed higher, lighting the barn like a cathedral. Sam moved through the crowd with his camera, capturing laughter, the scratch of pens, the clink of jars being passed around. The Samsung sauce flowed like communion. Then, right as I stepped down from the stage, a shout, "Fire!" Smoke poured from the western shed, one of the equipment storage buildings. Flames licked the roof, spreading fast. For a moment, chaos bloomed. People ran, shouted, grabbed hoses and buckets. Luis and Noel sprinted toward the blaze, pulling the emergency pumps from the irrigation tanks. I moved with them, shouting orders I didn't have time to think about. "Marta, get everyone back from the sheds. Priya, call the fire department, tell them chemical storage, west side." The air filled with acrid smoke. My lungs burned. My eyes stung, but I wasn't leaving. The old wooden walls crackled, and the heat slapped like betrayal. Then, through the haze, I saw it, just a flash, but enough. A man in a black jacket, slipping through the orchard toward a waiting truck. "Sam," I yelled. "Camera now." He swung his lens toward the fleeing figure, zoomed, snapped, captured the license plate as the truck fishtailed down the dirt road and vanished. By the time the fire trucks arrived, half the shed was gone. But the flames hadn't spread to the greenhouses. The seedlings were safe. The tomatoes were safe. And most importantly, the people were safe. When the smoke finally thinned, I stood among the ash, coughing, filthy, furious. The sheriff found me there. "Looks like arson," he said grimly. "We'll trace the truck." "You okay?" I nodded. "Just tired of people who think a woman's fight ends when she's tired." That night, while everyone else slept, I sat in the office reviewing the footage. Sam's camera had done its job. The plate was clear, the driver's profile sharper than luck should have allowed. We ran it through a friend at the paper's investigative desk. The name that came back made my stomach turn. Brad Mitchell. My son. The boy I'd driven to law school, fed on ambition, and defended against his own arrogance. At first, I thought it couldn't be him. Maybe he'd lent his truck to someone. Maybe Tricross had hired a man with the same build. But deep down, I knew. There are some silhouettes a mother never forgets. I sat there for hours, the screen casting its cold glow over the room. I didn't cry. Grief had already taken its taxes. What replaced it wasn't rage, it was a terrible, lucid calm. If he wanted to burn down my world, he'd better bring something stronger than gasoline. The next morning, I went to the sheriff's office myself, footage in hand. "Do your job," I said. "And don't go soft because the suspect shares my blood." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "You sure about this, Susan?" "I'm sure he made his choice." The arrest happened quietly 2 days later. The sheriff handled it discreetly, but news like that doesn't whisper, it shouts. Reporters descended on the mansion again, microphones and pity at the ready. I gave them the only quote they'd get. "Justice is a crop. You plant it, water it, and harvest it whether you like what grows or not." In the weeks that followed, the harvest accord exploded beyond our county lines. Dozens of farms joined, then hundreds. A coalition of independent retailers signed on to carry our collective produce. We built our own logistics hub, Luis's idea, Sam's design, a network born from ashes. The fire, ironically, had done us a favor. It made us visible. It made us real. Tricross tried one last maneuver, offering to merge with our cooperative under the guise of expanding opportunities. I sent them a 3-word reply. "Not for sale." Then I attached a photo of our fields in full bloom, rows of tomatoes stretching toward the horizon like red defiance. One evening, months later, as the sun dipped low and the workers packed up for the day, Sam joined me on the porch again. He'd grown into a man in those months, steady, taller, quieter. "Grandma," he said, "they're talking about naming the new distribution center after you." "Oh, good heavens," I said, fanning myself. "Just what the world needs, another building with my name on it. Let's name it after the land instead." It did the heavy lifting. He laughed. You really don't stop, do you? Stopping is for people who run out of stories, I said. He grew serious. Do you ever miss them? Mom and Uncle Brad? I looked out over the fields, the rows glowing gold in the last light. Missing is love with nowhere to go, I said softly. And love never dies, it just changes jobs. Mine works for the crops now. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas. Finally, I stood. Come on, Sam. Help me pack some jars for tomorrow's market. Those strawberries won't sell themselves. He grinned, following me inside. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I poured a small glass of Robert's favorite brandy and stepped out under the stars. The fields shimmered faintly in the moonlight, the hum of irrigation like a heartbeat. I raised the glass to the sky. To you, Robert, I said. To the farm. To second chances. And to every woman who's ever been told she's done. The wind rustled through the tomato vines, a whisper that sounded suspiciously like approval. I smiled. We did it, darling. We turned grief into growth. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like a widow at all. I felt like what I'd always secretly been: a builder, a fighter, and the last person you should ever underestimate.